Hello, Wake Up New Zealand, Karasaki speaking. Well, time and time again, I hear people quoting New Zealand Bill of Rights. We've got the right to speak, we've got the right to peaceful assembly, we've got a right to freedom of thought, we've got a right to express our ideas. Well, we all have gone through this and we all think this, that if you did your research, you would find out those rights are not absolute in the New Zealand Bill of Rights. So the New Zealand Bill of Rights, it was proposed in 1985 by the Labour government that we had a New Zealand Bill of Rights. So in 1990, it was introduced by the Labour government. So New Zealand BORA, New Zealand Bill of Rights, 1990, your human rights, democratic rights are not absolute under this bill. They are seriously limited. Limited by restrictions, your freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, mobility, freedom of thought has been curtailed according to this legislative bureaucratic discretion that has been used when it was actually formulated, when the Bill of Rights came about, when the plan was put in action and passed by royal assent. So the New Zealand Bill of Rights is one of interpretation then of, say, evaluation. The government determines what is justified by limitations. So when the Labour government brought it in, they actually said that they stated that the judicial had the right to actually determine what is consistent, inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights when making judgments. So the Attorney General, of course, passes royal assent on any bills that go through. So that was passed, approved by the Attorney General. So Section 4 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights, freedoms and rights, may be subject to reasonable, limited, prescribed law. Legislation, by the way. As can be justified in a free and democratic society. Hence, this is very conflicting messages because a free and democratic society is defined by the freedom of expression, and it's an essential foundation of a democratic society. Essentially, a free society's foundation is of self-fulfillment, the right to express one's own thoughts and ideas, to communicate freely with others, affirming dignity and worth of each other and other members of society, allowing each other and every other individual to realize his or her potential, her own full human potential. So Part 1, Section 2 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights affirms the rights and freedoms as guaranteed. In Section 5, Justified Limitation Clause is Section 6. That requires that the consistent meaning to be given to the enactment is determined by the meaning given to by whom, what purpose, and reasoning. So who is in charge of that reasoning, and why the action, and why the purpose in it. So Part 2 refers to various substantive rights or guarantees. These are grouped together under subheadings, and they name life and liberty of the person, democratic and civil rights, non-discrimination, minority rights, search and arrest, and detention. So people's rights and freedoms are expressed or restricted by reason. Section 29 states that legal persons enjoy the benefit of New Zealand Bill of Rights so far as practicable. So who determines what is practical to do so or not? For what reason? For whose benefit? What purpose? So Section 5 affirms that rights are not absolute because it's reliant on the burden of proof. Not truth, proof. Whether demonstrated justifiably. There are no norms to telling the truth. The truth is in the eyes of the beholder. And what the eyes choose not to see, then the heart does not grieve over. So Section 5 refers to the creation of culture of justification as to limitations or not, what is to be limited and what is not to be limited of your freedoms and rights, whether democratic rights are justifiably reasonable or not in a free society, a free democratic society. Because what they have said in the New Zealand Bill of Rights, what is documented, has conflicting messages when it comes to what is reasonable, justifiable, and that is chosen not by the people, it's variable by reason and justification and purpose. So people's democratic human rights are definitely not absolute, and they're not absolutely limited. So it's a balancing act. It's ad hoc. So individual freedoms are necessarily limited by membership of society and by the rights of others and the interests of the community. Implicitly in the recognition in Section 5 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights, rights are subject to reasonable limits. That's the ad hoc balancing act. Reasons, purposes to limitations of democratic human rights that can be adapted for certain purposes, or even uncertainties for political activists, corporations, organisations, NGO, the government itself, the local government, etc. Definition of balancing a justification for limitations under ad hoc balancing act. It's not about the truth. So defining ad hoc balancing act is the limitations to human rights can be determined by the government for political uses and purposes, such as political policing at parliamentary grounds in Wellington. An incitement, they can use an incitement to lawless action as justification to limit democratic rights and freedoms. Therefore, not absolute. Courts, the judicial system can render your human rights as unapplicable, limited upon a judge's decision, determining the conclusion for variable reasons. Certain situations, different contexts can be variable. So the Justice Department stated, we recognise the dignity and worth of all people. That's a lie. They did not recognise the dignity and the worth of those that are jabbed, injured, those that were jabbed dead, those that have lost their jobs and their businesses, and those that have had to have surgery because they weren't able to make hospital appointments when they had cancer because they were restricted unjustifiably. What about the homeless, those who have had unnecessary suffering because we're not seen soon enough in hospital, and those that are sleeping on the street, and those children and families that are living in motels, temporary situations, as the homeless is gone up. And we bring in more immigrants who get first dabs at public housing. This is what's happened in New Zealand, and it's all unjustifiable without reasonable justification. So the Minister of Justice has in fact shown us by evidence that all people of New Zealand are not worthy of the truth. The Minister of Justice is not worthy of all of us, the people. The political cronies in the cesspit of Wellington are not worthy of the people. They are not speaking the truth. They are not telling you how many people have died of the jab. They haven't stopped the jab. There is no dignity. They are not treating you like dignified, worthy people. So the justified limiting of human rights depend initially on the burden of proof. What the eyes don't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. The scrutiny of the eye to detail what one wants to see and what one chooses to see. What angle are they seeing it at? See what I mean? How that can be used? Inconsistency. So Section 21 does not guarantee rights when it comes to search and seizure. This refers to having the right to be free on unreasonable searches and seizures. So who guarantees? Who says what is unreasonable and reasonable? Guarantees the right to be free of disproportionately severe treatment or punishment. That's Section 9. So does that simply state treatment or punishment? What is determined as disproportionately severe treatment, punishment? Does that simply determine that anyone can be dished out punishment and treatment? And they could call that, oh, well, that's not unreasonable. That is justified. That is not disproportionate. So this is where a class system can be identified as cultural Marxism, classifications of different morals and values as to what is reasonably justified to limit an individual's freedom, hence the limiting of one individual's human rights over another. The culture of justification contributes to the principles of good government. Well, good government, we haven't got that. We've got the worst government ever. They have none of these attributes that are named here. Transparency, accountability, rational public policy development. None. They are the most unjustified government we've ever had. And I put them all together. Every party member in that cesspit are not justified by the people of New Zealand. We do not deserve them. They are all on the same page. So the New Zealand Bill of Rights 1990 was amended 30th of August 2022. And it was referenced to Section 4 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights of inconsistency. Hence, the name of this Act is now New Zealand Bill of Rights Inconsistency Amendment Act. This means that the legislation of New Zealand Bill of Rights is inconsistent with the rights, freedoms affirmed in the New Zealand Bill of Rights 1990, 2.3, Section 4. That makes it clear that any legislation declared inconsistent by the courts remain valid and enforceable. Therefore, is variable, is not always consistent with what is written in the New Zealand Bill of Rights, is disagreeable with what is indicated in the New Zealand Bill of Rights, contradicts it. Therefore, there are limitations that can be used and are used to determine what is justifiable and what is not justifiable for certain reasons and certain purposes. We must note that the financial institutions and the banks all share the same political platform. So it's the same happens here. They will judge how you get a loan, whether you get it or not, through this type of inconsistent justification. So if you've been thinking that the New Zealand Bill of Rights gives you absolute rights with no limitations, you can be justified to think so because many of us have, but you've been unjustifiably hoodwinked. You've been lied to. We need to talk about this because so many people have got notices out, they've got placards up, Bill of Rights, New Zealand Bill of Rights, freedom of expression. I have done it myself. We have been sucked in and blown out in bubbles. We have had the carrot waved in front of our face, but when you go to take a bite, they pull it away. This is what's happening. And they do that purposely so. So the political system is corrupt, it's self-centered, and it's not about the people's rights. It's not about your human rights. It's about their rights and their privileges and their immunity. Wake up, New Zealand, because they're all on the same page. Wake up now.